Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at tRAS on AM5 Ryzen CPUs. This is a timing I really don't like because it has a lot of strange behavior. Even though, according to the, like JEDEC, I mean, this isn't JEDEC documentation directly, but this is like Micron's copy of JEDEC documentation. tRAS should be relatively simple to understand. It prevents you from sending a pre-charge command too soon after an activate command. That's its purpose. So let's get into all the weirdness that it does on AM5. So a typical XMP, okay, this is not a typical XMP. There we go. That's a typical XMP or Expo profile. Might look something like 30, 36, 36, 96. And then your motherboard is going to calculate TRC as 132 because it actually follows the JEDEC spec of tRAS plus tRP. Your motherboard does, not necessarily the AMD memory controller. Or you might have an XMP that looks like this, where you have like 30, 36, 30, 76. There are other options. I think I've seen like a 96 with 38s. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter that much exactly what the tRAS is. But anyway, so this is what you might start with as a typical XMP. And if this is a single rank memory kit and you just set this to 30 and this to 66, chances are that it'll be stable unless you use the iGPU. If you use the iGPU, for display output, the display powered by the iGPU is probably going to have weird artifacting issues when tRAS is set this low, which doesn't really make any sense because, in a typical activate, read, pre-charge sequence, that pre-charge command, like activate to pre-charge, so from here to here, well, even, mind you, RTP12 is tight, that's not JEDEC or Expo, that's like tightened. You might have like 12 here, 36 there, right, because TRCD-RD is 36. So that read command is coming in on cycle 36, and this is going to be on cycle 48, right? So I guess I should have typed this as, oh, right, Google Docs hates it when you do that. I hate Google Docs for doing that when I do that. Plus 36, right? And this will be like underscore plus 12. Right, so this is on cycle, so this is on cycle 0, this is on cycle 36, this is on cycle 48. So like we've satisfied tRAS before we even got to that read command. So in this scenario, tRAS shouldn't do anything. And then TRP is 36, so what is that? 36 plus 48 is a big number. 78 plus 6, 84. Right, so that activate command is going to be on 84. Now, so that's sort of how your, how a read operation works. A write operation is even longer because you have cast write latency, the data burst, TWR, which you can't set lower than 48. So this pre-charge command comes in like super duper late, right? There's no way that in a write sequence, you're going to have a tRAS violation. It's just not possible. Like, it's just, right? So it's really odd that with timings like this, setting tRAS to 30 could cause stability problems, right? Now, one possibility is that maybe the memory controller does this, and I don't really know why it would do that. Technically, this would be a manual refresh of a row. If you just activate a row and then you immediately pre-charge it, that refreshes the data in the row because you just pulled the data out of the capacitors into the sense amplifiers, and then you put the data back into the capacitors. So you've restored the charge levels on the capacitors by doing that, or refreshed the charge levels on the capacitors by doing that, if you will. And the memory controller could do that, but I don't know like why. It's not really getting any useful work done as far as I know. Alternatively, this might be because of like a speculative row opening action where like, oh, the memory controller opens a row and then changes its mind about actually reading from it. So in that scenario, okay, like tRAS, you might get like a TR like pre coming in on cycle 30, right? You go from 0 to 30. So that's like the one scenario where this like super low tRAS should actually do anything, is if you're going straight from an activate command to a pre-charge command. So it's very odd that setting tRAS too low is a thing, right? On single rank, you set it to 30, and with the iGPU, it'll tend to cause issues. If you're on dual rank, you don't even need to use the iGPU. If you set it to 30, it'll probably not be stable in stress tests. Like, it'll crash Prime 95, it'll crash Y Cruncher, which is very strange, because, like, how is it crashing these tests when, like, it is literally physically impossible for this pre-charge command to be earlier than cycle 48? I don't know why it causes this instability. I have no answer for that. Literally no idea. Like, evidently AMD's memory controller has to be doing this sometimes, but I don't know why it's doing that. And I don't know what purpose this serves. So that's really frustrating, that we have, like, this weird, like these weird, like, stability issues related to tRAS. So the next question I'm wondering is, like, does tRAS even affect performance? Because the thing is, I've heard from other people, I've not experienced this myself, that if you set tRAS wrong, it causes stuttering and other performance issues. I've personally never run into that. I even tried testing for it in this round of testing. Like, I tried using the Rift Breaker and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and neither of them really revealed anything other than the fact that they were both extremely inconsistent. As in, like, run to run on the same settings, they're like the 0.1% lows in Rift Breaker go up and down by like 10%. So good luck measuring anything with that. You know, imagine having a ruler that gets 10% shorter or longer at random. That great time measuring things. Anyway, so yeah, so I tried running some games, didn't really notice any stuttering or performance regressions from setting tRAS too low. Really didn't notice much of anything actually from setting tRAS. Ultimately, and I tried other tests, I also tried 3D Mark 11 physics, Y Cruncher, the benchmark, not Y Cruncher, the stress test, just the benchmark portion of Y Cruncher, LinPack, there was one other one, Geekbench 3. So yeah, I tried a whole bunch of different tests to like see, like, hey, does tRAS, like, it evidently causes stability issues, but does it actually do anything for performance? Well, no. No, it doesn't. But that's, like, it gets weirder. So here we have tRAS 126, 96, 60, 30. This is on a dual rank setup. This is one of the G-Skill 6000 CL26 kits, just running a 6000 CL26 on a 9700X. And I'm just running PyPrime because, like, I just listed off all the different workloads I tried. PyPrime was the only one that was sensitive enough to pick up some of the differences that I found that weren't tRAS, because even PyPrime can't tell the difference between tRAS 126 and tRAS 30. Actually, on dual rank, it looks like it's getting worse, which makes sense because dual rank would probably at tRAS 30 not pass stress tests. So this could actually be a sign of instability. But tRAS 60, like, even is higher than even some of the, like, optimal tRAS formulas, right? Like, one optimal tRAS formula is you take tRAS is equal to TRCDRD plus RTP, which makes sense, right? Or TRCDRD, RTP. So we should set tRAS to 48. Well, 60 is more than 48, and yet it still seems to have some kind of, like, weird performance regression. Or, well, I'm not even sure that I would consider this a performance regression, because PyPrime's also not that consistent, and there's a really good run in there. There's also a pretty bad one. But then, like, on a previous take, there wasn't, like, the best run was kind of meh, and the worst run was kind of, like, better. Right? So we have, like, the best of 10, like, best out of 10 runs, worst of 10 runs. And the thing is, like, for TRC32, I reran the test because, like, if something looked like it was the best performance, I wanted to make certain that it wasn't just, like, test variance, right? So, like, 96 over here, the first run was like, oh, this has the best average out of every configuration, and so I ran it again, and now the average is worse. Very marginally worse. But that just shows you that, like, yeah, this and this produce these results. That's the same thing. This is the same number. 60 is evidently slightly, like, seems to be slightly worse, even though the best runs were actually slightly better than, actually, no. Well, no, this one is the best run. Like, actually the best run out of any run that I did. Oh, that's also at RTP8. Yeah, that was something I forgot about. Though funnily enough, the average actually got worse. I love this. Anyway, so tRAS, like, yeah, it really doesn't seem to do anything. And this is true even at looser TRC values, right? Like 126, 162, because here we have 126 plus 36 equals 162. Yeah, that ran 18.5 seconds. Also, what's wild is if we go back to the JEDEC documentation from Micron, TRC is supposed to be tRAS plus tRP. tRP plus tRAS, so 126 plus 36 is 162. 18.5, but when we set it to 132, which is less than tRAS plus tRP, we get 18.4. And when we set it to 96, we get 18.2. 66, 18.2. 32, 18. What is going on? Like, evidently AMD's TRC, like whatever the BIOS is calling TRC is not TRC. At least not TRC as defined by JEDEC. Because this is not supposed to happen. And on the DDR4 memory controller from AMD, this didn't happen. Right? Like this wasn't a thing on DDR4. This is one of the reasons why like I didn't think to test this sooner, because it's like I just assumed that the DDR4 memory controller followed like the normal, like the JEDEC documentation. So why wouldn't the DDR5 one? Well, apparently the DDR5 doesn't. So that's really fun. I was like super convinced, like, well, this I didn't expect this to crash, but I was convinced that this would not run. Like I thought this wouldn't even post. But post it did, though it didn't run very well. Or at least it wasn't like uber fast. But yeah, across the board, so like 162, like 162 is slower than 132, which it shouldn't be. It should be the same. 96 is faster than 132. Again, it shouldn't be. And this is true regardless of what TRC you're at. I mean, what tRAS you're at. Like, you know, at tRAS 60, TRC 32 is still the fastest TRC configuration that you can run. So that's really interesting. It kind of makes me think that instead of TRC, like the way TRC is supposed to be defined is that it's supposed to basically make sure that the gap between this activate command and this activate command is long enough. But looking at the performance numbers, it kind of looks more like the thing that's going on. Can I grab these cells and just, yeah, okay. So it kind of looks more like this is going on. Oh. Right? Like that's what it looks like is going on, because it doesn't make sense that setting TRC to 32 when tRAS is at 126 would, like, it should not make, like, it shouldn't give us performance gains. Like, it should just not do that. If this memory controller was implemented as JEDEC intended for a DDR memory controller to be implemented, this shouldn't be a thing, yet it is a thing. So I kind of suspect that instead of TRC being a like overall duration check or like overall timing check, it's actually an extra delay that gets added to the end of whatever command sequence. But I need to do more testing on that. Probably the best way to test this is if TRC32 is stable at DDR5 8000, because if it is, yeah, I think it's just an extra delay at the end of the command sequence, which, yeah. But, so that needs more testing. Yeah, so that's like the first very interesting thing where it's like, oh, you could just push TRC like stupid low and it gains performance like impossibly low. And tRAS doesn't affect performance like at all. Like it just doesn't until it starts being unstable, in which case it maybe slightly affects performance, right? Another thing that I wanted to, okay, so that's the dual rank data, right? So on dual rank, it looks like tRAS doesn't affect performance. On single rank, or if it does affect performance, it affects it so little that it's difficult to measure, even with one of the most sensitive memory benchmarks that I'm aware of. And that's after I tried a whole bunch of different memory tests to see if, like, hey, maybe PyPrime is just being stupid about this. But no, like, nothing else I tried was detecting anything. Like, everything else was basically confirming what PyPrime is saying. It's just like, yep, tRAS actually just doesn't do anything unless you set it so low that it starts causing instability. And that's on the dual rank setup. Anyway, actually, most of the other workloads didn't even complain about tRAS being set to 30 at all. It really, like, the fact that, like, this might be a like a sign of instability, that's like a pi prime thing, because nothing else that I tried to run was showing any signs of anything like that. Anyway, and I was really hoping for that. Like, if I had, like, especially like Rift Breaker, I had like high hopes that, like, oh, I'm gonna run this game, and then when I set tRAS to 30, it's gonna like micro stutter like crazy or something. But it just didn't. It just didn't. It just didn't care. So that was greatly upsetting. But anyway, I also tested on single rank because, like I mentioned earlier, dual rank complains about tRAS a lot more frequently than single rank does, right? Single rank, you usually run into issues with too low tRAS because you use the iGPU. On dual rank, too low tRAS, you're not even passing stress tests on the CPU. So anyway, single rank, 126 tRAS, and 96, and 60, and 30, and it more or less produced the same result. Again, 30 seems to be kind of slower down here, though, funnily enough, when I retested 30 at a later point over here, 30 is actually the fastest. I wouldn't read into that too much. This is still with, like, this small of a performance change, even for pi prime, I would consider that margin of error. So that's a joke. That I don't actually think that was the fastest configuration. That I think that configuration just got lucky. I think functionally tRAS 30 and 126 have the same performance, right? Especially outside of things that are pi prime. Like, if you ran a game on this, like pi prime here shows like this huge performance regression going from 162 to 255 TRC. That's the only time that, like, games got noticeably slower. Because going from like 162 to 132, which pi prime sort of shows as like, yeah, that's actually you see a performance improvement doing that. Most games don't really care that much. Like, this is still a little bit of an improvement, but nothing as big as what pi prime is showing. And so, yeah, I wouldn't really like. So when pi prime says that there's like a 0.05 difference or 0.06 difference, everything else is going to tell you it's the same, is basically what I'm getting at. So again, like, tRAS doesn't matter. Like, even if this difference was real, which I don't think it is, it would not be noticeable outside of pi prime. But anyway, so yeah, on single rank, it's just the same thing. Like, we have 18.3, 18.2. Unfortunately, it's kind of inconsistent, right? This is 126 with 32. Also, again, like, setting TRC as low as it goes gains performance, even though we're, like, massively violating the way TRC is supposed to be implemented according to the JEDEC spec. But that's the funny thing with memory testing and memory tuning, is like, you can read the JEDEC spec and then you're faced with the reality of how somebody implemented their DDR memory controller. Because DDR memory chips are really, really, really dumb. Okay? The only memory timings that a DDR5 memory chip is actually aware of are CAS latency, CAS write latency, read to pre-charge, write to and write recovery. It doesn't know any of the other timings. Why doesn't it know any of the other timings? Because it doesn't need to know. Oh, I guess it needs to know TRFC. Actually, no, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't even know what the freaking TRFC is. It doesn't know anything. It doesn't have registers for those timings because it doesn't need to have registers for those timings. And registers cost money and, like, die space. And so DRAM manufacturers don't want to put extra circuitry into their memory chips. So memory chips don't know most memory timings. Literally have no idea. So all of the timings like tRAS, tRC, tRP, RTP is governed by the memory chip. The reason for that is there's a variant, so you have like a regular read command and then the memory controller manually sends a precharge. There's a variant of read called read auto precharge, so read A, and read auto precharge tells the memory chip to precharge itself. So you send read auto precharge and the memory chip counts down RTP and then it internally starts the precharge. Same for write. There's a write auto precharge. And it does the same thing. Like, the memory chip receives the data and then it precharges itself after TWR. The CPU doesn't need to send that pre-charge command. And the reason those commands exist is it basically frees up like some traffic on the command address bus, right? Instead of like manually, like instead of the CPU telling the memory chip, hey, you need to pre-charge, the CPU just tells the memory chip, hey, could you read and then pre-charge yourself, right? I'm not going to tell you to pre-charge, just pre-charge whenever, like once RTP is over, and do that yourself. This is not my problem anymore. So the memory chip needs to know what RTP is, but it doesn't need to know what RCD-RD is, right? Like it doesn't need to know this because the CPU is going to send the activate and the CPU is going to send the read. You don't have an activate auto read command. That's not a thing. So it doesn't need to know what TRCD-RD is. So yeah, and it also doesn't know what TRP is because the CPU is going to send that activate command, right? Like a memory chip isn't going to know which row to activate next. So it doesn't need to know how long a pre-charge is supposed to take, right? Doesn't need to know that. That's the CPU's problems, not the memory chips. So because memory chips are so incredibly dumb, it means that the implementation of a lot of memory timings is just up to whoever designed the memory controller instead of, JEDEC. And that leads to funny things like this, where TRC just gains performance even when you set it way below tRAS, below tRP. Like, it's just... what is going on? I have no idea. Right? So yeah, like that's why I feel like AMD's TRC implementation might be like an extra delay at the end of a command chain rather than an actual like, hey, is this command chain too short type thing. But anyway, so yeah, 126.32, we got 18.325, 18.22. 9632, we got 1.2, 18.2, 18.2 again. 6032, 18.2, 18.3. 3032, we got 18.3, 18.3. So maybe, again, we're seeing some kind of signs of instability showing up. Though, I mean, we were also getting an 18.3 at 126. So it could also just be that pipeline is just not consistent enough. Anyway, and then after doing all of this like tRAS, TRC testing, I was like, okay, well, the other thing I want to check at this point is RTP and tRP, right? And so one interesting thing that I noticed, and this is probably specific to Hynix 16 gigabit A die, because that's the memory chip that I used for this testing, is that you can trade RTP for tRP. So 36 and 8 RTP, this boots and it's stable. This boots and it's stable, but 30 and 8, not stable at all. Like, this is super unstable. And that kind of makes sense if you look at the, like, timing behavior. Because basically what you're doing is, like, so instead of, like, +8, right? So you'll have, like, +8. And we'll, oh, wait, no, not that. I want to move this. So you'll have, like, 8 plus 36. And this activate command is on... so if we go like 0, 0, wait, no, so this will be on 8 and this will be on 44, right? So you have 8, 36, 44. And then the other one I tested was 30 and 12, right? And that's 42 for the activate. But what didn't work was setting this to 8 also, probably because that means that activate command is on a 38th clock cycle relative to our read. Right? So probably what would have worked is like a 34 and 8. Like 834 would have probably worked because that would be 42 again. But I didn't bother to check if that's actually the case. I need to, like, that's a separate, like, thing that I noticed that I want to do more testing on. But yeah, so that's like an interesting, like, stability thing. But from a performance perspective, 3012 and 36.8. I mean, on single rank, it looks like 36.8 is actually terrible. Then again, I think this is margin of error, these results over here, right? Like 3012 is very consistently faster, apparently. But then you look at dual rank, it's the kind of the other way around, because we have 3012 getting like low 18s to actually, yeah, like, well, this is, oh, right, that's TRC 66. Yeah, so that makes sense. So we have 3012, like 32, 3012 with 18. And then we have 36.8, and this actually looks slightly, marginally faster. So again, this is like within that range of like, oh, Pi Prime might be seeing a difference, but I don't think anything else would, based on my experience with like trying a whole bunch of other tests. So yeah, because this is actually one of the things that like I did test this. Like that's the dual rank extras. There's like a bunch of Y-Cruncher data that made me very upset because it was just like not showing any differences, even for stuff like this. Which, if you think about it, makes sense because Y-Cruncher, like Pi Prime, is very latency sensitive. Y-Cruncher is very bandwidth heavy. RTP and TRP are not really bandwidth. Like they're not really gonna affect your memory bandwidth unless they're completely horrendous. And the reason for this is this sequence of like activate, read, pre-charge, activate. This happens if you have a very large data set that doesn't fit in the L3 cache of the CPU that is randomly accessed, right? Because if your data wasn't a disorganized mess, ideally what should be happening is wait. You should end up with something that looks like... Wait, oh. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, we're gonna... No, I'm not... whatever, we're just gonna leave it this way. Like, if you have like a memory bandwidth test, you're gonna have command chains that look like this, where you have like... Well, actually, it wouldn't look exactly like this. You'd have a whole bunch of activates somewhere before this. So you'd have a whole bunch of rows open, and then you would just read from them in an interleaved fashion. And you wouldn't be, like, pre-charging these rows and, like, changing which row you're reading from. Like, you would just read from a whole bunch of rows at the same time. And the pre-charge command would be, like, eventually you'd get to the point where you need to open a different set of rows, but that's going to be, like, way, you know, off the screen. It's not going to be happening anytime soon. Now, Pi Prime, on the other hand, it is a relatively large data set, but it's not a bandwidth hog. So the end result is that you have, like, you know, you open a row, you read, like, a little bit of it, and then you immediately have to close it so that you can go open a different row so that you can read a little bit of it, and then close it, and then open a different row. And maybe there's also some writes mixed into that. I don't know. Right, I don't actually know what exact command mix Pi Prime tends to use usually. But basically you have this like workload where you have a lot of data and it's it's a disorganized mess. So you can't just queue up your read commands in a nice orderly queue. You constantly have to open rows and close rows and open rows. And so this is going to be hitting tRAS, tRC a lot. And also TRP and like TRC, DRD. It's just going to be hitting all of the primary timings, like over and over and over again. Actually, all of these timings. It's just going to be smashing them. But most workloads don't do that, right? Like if your workload has a lot of data and you're accessing it at like completely random, your program kind of written like garbage. So... Yeah, so the fact that, like, Geekbench doesn't care about TRC very much, that Y-Cruncher doesn't care about TRC, that 3D Mark 11 doesn't really... Well, 3D Mark 11 cared a bit. Not as much as Pi Prime, but it cared a bit, because that's a rigid body physics simulation, so, you know, those rigid bodies gotta, like, sit in RAM somewhere, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe they fit partially in the L3 cache. Maybe we need more rigid bodies in the 3D Mark 11 physics test. But anyway, so yeah, whereas like Y-Cruncher is like very bandwidth heavy, Geekbench 3 is basically just a straight memory bandwidth test. So yeah, I'm not really surprised that like TRP, like RTP and TRP are not really affecting performance in, well, anything. Even though theoretically, low TRP should be better than low RTP because TRP is also used for writes, right? Like RTP is only relevant after a read command, right? Like TRP is relevant even after a write, right? Like, because this is read RTP pre, and this is write the pre. And so this, like, effectively, like having low TRP is good for both of these sequences, instead of like low RTP, which is only good for this sequence. But yeah, in actual like testing, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference. So like whatever, I guess. The main takeaway for me from this testing is that like evidently you can set tRAS to 126 and it's just not good. There's no downsides. Like it's just yeah. And also I need to test like if you can run like super low TRC even at high frequencies, because if you can, that would be very interesting from like a performance perspective. So yeah, that's it, I think, for the video. Is like the main thing is just like evidently tRAS really doesn't matter. Actually, if other people want to test this, like just like set your tRAS to 126, and if you notice any performance issues, I'd love to hear about it, because I really tried to like find anything that cares about tRAS. And maybe I just like maybe there's some application that I didn't think of, but everything I tried, it's just like, yeah, tRAS doesn't do anything. PipeRime doesn't care. 3D Mark 11 physics doesn't care. Rift Breaker CPU test doesn't care. Y-Cruncher doesn't care. Geekbench 3 doesn't care. The Shadow of the Tomb Raider doesn't care. Like, nothing I tried cares about tRAS from a performance perspective. From a stability perspective, if you set it too low, it does cause issues. So that's what's like making me think that honestly, probably the best way to deal with tRAS is to just set it to 126 and call it a day. As weird as that looks, instead of like, especially compared to like the various formulas that exist for like calculating optimal tRAS, and like some of them even I do agree with the logic behind them. Like, yeah, TRC DRD plus RTP makes sense, or TRC-DWR plus cast write latency plus your data burst plus your write recovery being your tRAS, that also makes sense. Like, I can see the logic, but when you actually try to test if tRAS does anything, it doesn't do anything. And so to me, it makes more sense to just like I don't like using a formula just because like having a like I don't like having a magical formula that you can't prove actually works, right? Even if like logically speaking, yeah, TRC-DRD plus RTP makes perfect logical sense. But tRAS 48, and actually I do think I did test that at some point. Wait, no, that might have been in the everything. tRAS. Oh, I tested 80, 66. Oh no, I did test 48. Yeah, and I got super frustrated that it was just not doing anything to performance. And so I gave up on that. So yeah, like, oh yeah, I tested tRAS 48 a bunch. Yep. Yeah, I tested it a bunch and just got super like, oh man, so much tRAS 48. And then it was like, yeah, it just doesn't do anything. That's why I didn't bother to, because like I made this mess of just trying to like do everything, and then it's like, okay, this is not working. Let's just only focus on tRAS. And yeah, it just doesn't do anything. So like all the formulas, and that's probably why there's like formulas for tRAS and like, because I've had people like tell me during live streams like, Buildzoid, your tRAS is too low, you should like use this formula or use that formula. I pretty distinctly remember actually running like spot checks during streams on tRAS and always running into the problem of like it evidently just doesn't do like it, like nothing I tried would actually like affect performance in a statistically significant manner. So I just kept sticking to that whole like, oh, just set it to 30, call it a day. Like, unless you're using the iGPU or you're on dual rank, it doesn't actually cause any stability issues. So I fail to see the issue. So I fail to see a reason to not just run it as low as it goes. But yeah, evidently, you could also just run it as high as it goes, and that's much safer. It's not going to cause any stability issues, and it doesn't cost you any performance. But it does create that stupid problem of like, well, if you set tRAS to 126, this doesn't work anymore, right? Like the tRAS plus tRP thing, like that doesn't work at all, because like you don't want to run TRC 162. It is very slow. Like this is bad for performance. So it creates the like now I have like now I need to do like separate testing specifically on TRC. But going forward, I'm going to just set tRAS to 126 because I've tried really hard to find something that like shows, hey, there is like a good tRAS number and you should use it. But I haven't found anything like that. And so I'm just going with like, yeah, just set it to 126 and call it a day. That seems to be the most reasonable solution to me because it evidently doesn't impact performance, but if you set it too low, it does affect stability, right? And so you can't set it too low if you set it to 126. Anyway, there. That's actually it for the video. So I am going to be, yeah. So yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you find this useful. Also, again, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on my findings. Like, because again, like maybe there's some workload that I overlooked or something, but uh, just like to me, it just like yeah. So I'd love to hear like feedback from other people because that's yeah, like that I'm not 100. Like the thing is like can't like I didn't like I already made a like well. Yeah, I already kind of made a mistake once with just the whole like, oh, just set it as low as it goes. Evidently, that wasn't necessary. Um, but yeah. So I'd hate to accidentally go in the opposite direction, but like, that's what it looks like to me. It's like you could just set it to 126, and there's no downsides. At least not any that I can measure. So yeah. Anyway, that's it. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this somewhat useful and or interesting. Um, and if you'd like to support the channel, there are links in the description. It would be very appreciated if you check them out. And that's it. So thank you for watching and goodbye.